It's another Friday, and that means another edition of the Zogby Report, real and unscripted. In fact, Jeremy just said to me, what are we going to talk about today? And it just popped into my head. Well, there's only really one thing to talk about, and that is the race. And so, you up for it, Jared?
Yeah. I'm up for it.
All right. So real quick, no question that Kamala Harris got a bump from getting into the race, a bump from the honeymoon and the Democratic convention, a bump from the debate with Donald Trump. And now there's a second assassination attempt on former President Trump. And we see, at least in the one poll that has been done entirely since that assassination attempt, that it's now tied 47-47. That's the New York Times Siena poll, which suggests, and that's as far as we can go, suggests that maybe Trump has caught up and that things are back at equilibrium. But the question that I have is this race really moving? You know, if you looked at the 9 previous polls to the one that was taken since the debate, you saw blue on Real Clear Politics. You saw nationally Kamala Harris leading by 3 and a few instances, many as 5 points over Trump nationwide. Possibly a different story. While she has caught up in the battleground states, you'll have Trump, averaging anywhere from a 0.3 to a 0.7 to a 1.1 lead. Same thing in half the states, battleground states, where Harris is leading by the same amounts. And so for those of us who are watching and scrutinizing, the real question is, if there's any movement in the polls, 1 or 2 points, one way or another, aren't we just really fictitiously changing the lead and over-reporting that it has swung one way or swung the other way? Remember, we have a margin of sampling error. Remember, as you have pointed out many times, it's the sampling itself. Some polls have a few more Republicans in their sample than other polls do. Others have more independents than others do. And so in reality, aren't we just really saying this is a very close race? It's too close to call. It might be sensitive to a black swan event. And we've had a gaggle, if that's what you call it, of black swans so far, with probably more to come. But essentially, no one is really leading right now.
I would say that is spot on. Well said and perfectly said. I'll only just add details. That poll that just came out by Siena in the New York Times, I looked at it, and the total sample was over 2,000 or 2,400, about 1,000 nationally, and then the other 1,400 large samples from the state of Pennsylvania and Philadelphia. Now that's bizarre. I don't know. I would never do a release a poll like that. I don't think you would. And even if we were, I would have up front in my methodology statement what the rationale was for that. Well, I didn't see the rationale from the Times Siena. I've seen a lot of. I'm just going to be. I have the freedom to say this. I'm going to say I've seen a lot of sloppiness. So I'm suspected. I have reason to believe. Well, why did they do that? And I don't know. Does that move the needle on the horse race by doing that? I don't know. I can speculate. Does that bring Harris down? Does that bring Trump down? I guess we'll never know because we can't see the real data, the unweighted data, and the full data set. But those are the kind of things that we are going to see. We have seen over the past few months in varying ways. I've talked about different examples of some firms releasing unweighted samples, which are over-reporting Democrats or over-reporting independents or under-reporting Republicans. And of course, there are a few Republican firms that almost always have the Republican candidate ahead 8 or 9 times out of 10. And so with all of that said, the averages of all the polls, which I don't think there's truth in averaging, all of the polls. I don't think that's the way we get to the truth, but it does suggest that it's a tight race. More polls are showing that it's a tight race. And I think it's really just going to, like last time, it's really going to come down to a couple or a handful of counties and tens of thousands of votes within each one. I don't think we're any different of a position. But as you pointed out, if there is a black swan that positions, or an October surprise, that positions one candidate better to move the needle on those who are sitting on the fence and waiting it out. And we know that that's always the case, the swing voters and the undecided. And I would also have to agree with you. I would say there's a strong chance we haven't seen anything yet in terms of what those shocking events that play out in the next several weeks. But I'll end by saying, there's an old Arab adage, an old Arab proverb that says, "He who predicts is a fool." And that's why pollsters really should only predict in the final poll. After they've been studying their turnout models, they've been looking and tracking the polls, following the issues and the events. It's really that last poll in the final week that is the only time that you could feel comfortable in saying, "I think I have a hunch." And of course, you should hunch. You should hedge and say, "Have a hunch," because it's a tight race.
Again, I agree. Just a brief, I hope instructive history lesson here. We've had 3 very close elections this century. And what I want folks to know is, for example, that razor thin election that George W. Bush won in 2000. Al Gore won the popular vote. There was a late breaking surge in his favor in the popular vote. But of course, he apparently, and I'll still say apparently, lost Florida, although I'm not sure that that's the case. But what people have to know about that race is that it wasn't razor thin the entire time. We were daily tracking, for Reuters and NBC News in September, October, right on up to the election day. And at some points, the race would swing to Al Gore as many as 4 or 5 points of a lead. And just when you got the next day's results and thought, you know what, he's running away with it, you'd start to see his lead dissipate and then tide. And then pendulum would swing the other direction to George W. Bush, who then would bring his lead at least a couple of times up to 4 or 5 points. And so, as you're pointing out, at the last minute, when we really pay attention, when those undecideds finally break, in the last couple of days, that's when Gore caught a surge. And I write about this in my book. He caught a surge and ultimately would win the popular vote by 0.5%, which, because of the peculiarities of the Electoral College, number one, and number two, let's just throw it out there that his brother was governor of Florida, and the Secretary of State who oversees election results was a Bush appointee, and then whatever it was, Gore lost the election. But we're going to jump to 2012 also, and we're going to see that Barack Obama won re-election, and he won re-election handily. But that race was very similar to 2000 in the sense that it was back and forth, swinging towards Mitt Romney, by 3 or 4 points, and then slowly and steadily back to Obama, back to Romney over the course of a few days. And so these, weren't neat little ties here that were taking place. The only case that was different. Well, let me finish the Romney Obama situation. Is that I wrote a piece in Forbes on Saturday following the latest daily tracking that I had, this time for the Washington Times. And what I saw was Obama pulling ahead in all of the battleground states. By where he was behind or tied, got into a 2 or 3 point lead in the battleground states, which prompted me to ask, maybe this is not going to be so close after all, that Obama is going to win by inches in many states and get a wipeout in his favor in the Electoral College. That's what happened. Lastly, quickly, 2004, John Kerry versus George W. Bush. I think the most interesting thing out of that was that John Kerry's numbers never moved. They were at 48% in a matchup against George W. Bush in the spring of 2004. He ended up with 48% of the vote on election day. It was the EKG of a dead person. It was 48, 48, 48, 48, a straight line. It was Bush who was going up and going down and who rode the crest at the very end. And of course, I have some questions about that one too, about whether or not there were shenanigans in Ohio by the Secretary of State, Blackwell. But in any event, this is a race that is fascinating to watch, but no real winner yet. So sorry to dash the hopes of either side, but you're not going to get a prediction from here.
Well, the takeaway from that is we've had election denialism for 24 years now.
Pretty much, yeah.
And look, this is the dirty little secret. I hope nobody catches this, but study your American history. It goes back pretty far. But anyway,
it goes back pretty far. Yeah.
I just say, for what it's worth, what I'm looking for in terms of moving the needle is I'm looking at three things. I'm looking at the economy and what happens, how the markets react. The Federal Reserve is lowering interest rates. What's that going to do? I don't know. Does the market go haywire? Does it instill just enough optimistic juice into the economy right in time for the election? I don't know. One could make the case either way, but what is that? What effect is that going to have, and who's that going to benefit? Look out for that. Of course, we have three geopolitical tinderboxes that could really go south. Well, actually, one of them just went south 3 days ago. And what happened in Lebanon, which is just, if we could even imagine, 9/11 was terrifying. I was terrified. Everybody was terrified. And look how big of a country we are. Imagine a country basically the size of, I don't know, Massachusetts, with 4,000, 5,000 devices just blowing up. Imagine the terror that instills in that. But, what does Hezbollah do in response? Now they're pushed into a corner. They have to retaliate. And I'm afraid that whole region is just going to go up in flames. So then you have Ukraine and Russia, and now you have the prospect of Ukraine maybe even launching missiles into Russia, and NATO supplying Ukraine with it. And we know from what Vladimir Putin has said that is the red line. That is the moment where Russia and NATO have direct military confrontation. And then, of course, never forget Taiwan and China. Three tinderboxes. And what happens there? Well, I think could immensely impact the election. And then, of course, more assassination events. We've already had 2. If there's another one, does Trump begin to look like, how does that create an appeal for Trump? I know that sounds crazy, but you could convince a large enough slice of the public to say that that's proof in the pudding that somebody wants him out, somebody wants rid of him, and that could be a liability for him. That could also work for him. And so those are 3 complex dynamics to watch closely to see if it moves the needle.
I'm going to just comment very quickly that so far, anyway, evidence for the first assassination attempt, I don't want to be misunderstood, but polling wise worked in his favor. He got a bump.
Yeah.
Evidence preliminarily here from the Siena poll, for what that's worth, is that it may be where the second attempt may be working as well. But I have a hunch, and it's only a hunch, that much like the election of 2012, 2024 may be one of those very close, very tight races, and that the weekend before, just as in 2012, the dam breaks and there's a surge one way or another. I just haven't figured out which way that is. As you point out, it could be the economy and crime. As Americans wake up and say, things have been pretty bad. Or on the other hand, it can be a realization, hey, maybe inflation has slowed. Reproductive rights are very important. I fear democracy, whatever the loss of democracy, whatever the case may be. I would like on my end to once again comment on my book that is available where you buy books, but certainly on Amazon, where there's an 18 or a 40% discount. Also from the publisher Rowman and Littlefield, and from Barnes and Noble as well. I think you'd find it illuminating. And Jerry, you get the last word.
I'm just going to say, get the book, and then you'll know as much about polling as we do.
And then we'll be afraid that they get too good at it.
There's always that fear, but
okay. Have a good week.